newsrooms. Research, good idea. Research is probably the most attainable part. So let's start off with the basics. What is prospect research? So essentially, it's the process of collecting information about your potential prospects, your potential donors, to determine the likelihood of their giving to your organization. And the main uses for prospect research and prospect development is for major gifts or capital campaigns. You know, these areas where you're looking for larger sums of money is where majority of it focuses. And like we talked about, it can be done in-house or through consultants. And it's emerged as a professional field as the competition for philanthropic dollars has increased. So since there's so many great nonprofits out there, you want to make sure your organization has a step ahead, you know, a head start. Can you hear my audio okay? I noticed someone in the chat said I'm fading in and out. I'm gonna assume.
I hear you fine.
Okay, just let me know if you can't. Sorry for the interruption. Anyways, back to prospect research. It's used by all different types of nonprofits, from universities to hospitals are probably the ones that use it most often. But you can do it at an art museum, you can do it at a library, you can do it at nonprofit news, and it's beneficial to every organization. And it's a really important part of the fundraising cycle because overall it does save you time because it gives you a head start in making the ask. You're going to learn a lot about your donors that you'll know right from the beginning that you won't kind of have to guess about during the middle. And by knowing
Emily, Josh.
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry. Josh had raised his hand. I wanted to allow Josh to ask a question if he wanted to.
Yes, please do. Sorry, I can get on a tangent. I love
Sorry, I think that was a mistake. I apologize.
Okay.
Oh,
totally fine. Okay. So yeah, just all in all, by knowing who has the capacity to make a major gift, you can really give yourself a head start. So the benefits are kind of implied, and we kind of just talked about them. But again, you develop that relationship with a head start. You get that insider knowledge on your donors before maybe you even talk with them on the phone or meet with them in person. You can kind of gauge their interests and understand their wealth. It helps you develop engagement strategies. And I think it really helps take your cultivation and stewardship to the next level and make sure your donors feel appreciated throughout the entire process. And I think one of the biggest benefits is you can estimate your ask amounts. So one of my biggest fears as a fundraiser is going into a major gift ask and asking for way too little. And the donor's just like, yep, real quick, they're like, I can do that totally. And you can kind of tell, they're like, oh, I could have asked for $5,000 more or $10,000 more. So this is one of the biggest benefits because you can look at their indicators of wealth and previous philanthropic giving and see where they're at. So that's a really big benefit to it as well. And we'll kind of get into how to do that a little bit later. We can hop to the next slide. Thank you. So the biggest question I get as a prospect researcher is it ethical? And yes, it's completely ethical if you do it correctly. And luckily, there is an association for professional researchers that helps guide our standards and our ethics to make sure that it's being done with the utmost integrity. But just a couple quick notes before we get into the ethics. All of the information you're looking for is publicly available. Doing this prospect research is just a standardized and professional way of finding that information while making sure you're still honoring your donors' privacy. And similarly to journalism, where you're only looking for information that's relevant to whatever you're working on, in prospect research, you're only looking for information that's relevant to your fundraising. So you're not just looking for everything and anything, and you're not going to use it outside of your fundraising practice. So with that being said, let's just briefly go over the ethics a little bit. These are set by APRA, which is the Association of Professional Researchers for the Advancement. And they're kind of the guiding organization that sets the standard. So the first one is integrity. When you're conducting prospect research, you want to make sure you're truthful and transparent with respect to your personal identity, but also the organization that you're working for. You want to strive to increase the respect and recognition of yourself, your organization, fundraising in general, but also the field. So you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to further the profession and yourself and your organization. Our next one is accountability. This is big. You really want to respect the privacy of your donors and conduct your work with the highest level of discretion. You're finding out information that's publicly available, but that doesn't mean you can go tell all your friends or something like that. You still need to adhere to all applicable laws and policies of your organization and conduct yourself in a professional manner with the standards of your organization. Our next one is practice. You want to make sure your work is as accurate as possible. We're dealing with data here, so we want to make sure that it's accurate and true. And we're only taking that data that's appropriate to the fundraising process. And we want to protect the confidentiality of all personal information at all times. And our last one, conflicts of interest. We just want to make sure we're avoiding competing professional and personal interests that can create an appearance of impropriety that might hurt us, our organization, or the profession in general. We can hop to the next slide. Perfect. So before we get into the nitty gritty, let's also talk about where does prospect research fit in with the donor cycle. So you might be familiar with the donor cycle that usually looks like a wheel that kind of takes you through the life cycle that you should go through with every single donor for each gift that they make. And prospect research really fits in the first two parts, identification and qualification. It also gets into analysis a little bit, but we're going to focus on identification and qualification for my time here. But the first one is, you need to identify your top donors, and then you need to qualify them to make sure they have the ability to make a major gift. Ideally, the information that you learn throughout conducting your research has an effect on your stewardship and cultivation as well, making the stewardship and cultivation cycle as unique to the donor as you can, but it is most prevalent in those first two areas. So now that we know the basics, let's talk about a couple different elements of prospect research. So first, let's talk about prospect identification, which is that first level. So when you're trying to identify new prospects, ideally the first place to start and look for prospects is your own donor database. And you can look at your annual fund donors, you can look at your members and your volunteers. Really, anyone who's already expressed an interest in your organization is where you should go to first, because those are your best prospects. You already know that they're a fan of yours. And you can look to like newsletter subscribers as well. I might have mentioned that, but we all have really big newsletter bases, and those are a great place to start. But once you've made it past your donor database, when you're ready to identify totally new people, it's the first place to look is your board members, your donors, your employees, and other people affiliated with your organization. I think it's critical that your board members be involved in fundraising, and they can do that by connecting you with other influential philanthropic people in the community that they might know. Maybe they sit on another board, or maybe they attend events with other influential people. And that's a really simple way that your board members can help you out, and really one of the best ways to identify new prospects. Same with employees and other donors and volunteers. But you can also look at business journals and local publications to see who's up and coming in your community, see what events they might be attending and that sort of thing. And you can also use databases to help you identify new prospects as well. There are a couple out there. But the biggest takeaway, I think, from trying to identify new prospects is to rely on your networks, because a personal introduction to a new prospect beats anything else. So really use your network, your board members, to accomplish that. So we've identified our prospects. Great, that's done. Now we're ready to start the research. So you do this through in-house consultants. Doing it in-house usually requires some sort of database subscription, which does cost money. Consultants do as well, but there are many consultant agencies out there that focus solely on prospect research. So that's a really great resource. And an element of conducting research that can save you time is wealth screening. This is identifying wealth markers in certain prospects. And it's just an element of the cycle that I wanted to mention that we'll get into a little bit more later. So again, before we can even start the research, there's more to know. We need to know what makes up a good prospect, so we know what to look for and how to identify it when we see it. So according to Donor Search, which is a prospect research database, the top 5 elements of a good prospect are past charitable giving to your organization. So obviously they've already expressed interest in your mission. You know, you already know that they like what you do. Maybe they're testing the waters, or maybe they need a more personal connection before making a major gift. Another element of a good prospect is past charitable giving to other nonprofits. So that shows that they're philanthropically minded and they're interested in supporting the causes that they care about. A third one is involvement in nonprofits as a trustee or director. I think this shows an understanding of what it's like to be in a nonprofit. You know, they know how critical donations are to nonprofits, so they're more likely to give. And that's another great connection as well. Our fourth element is political giving. Now, I will say this is a tricky one. Traditionally, it's been a really robust source of data, but over the past couple of years, there's been some changes about how we can use this information. The FEC has recently changed some laws about what we can use to inform our fundraising strategy. And the APRA, the professional organization, actually has a case with the FEC to see how we can use this data for prospect research. So it is helpful, but just be mindful when you're using it and look up, you know, what the most current rules and regulations are, because we do want to act with integrity and make sure we're adhering to donors' privacy as well. But our last one is real estate ownership. Typically, people with high value of real estate have the ability to make a major gift. I just be mindful of this one too. Obviously, in places like New York City, you know, especially with certain databases, things can be astronomically priced, or people could have inherited something. So with some of these, you need to do a little bit more digging, but they are good green flags, as I like to call them. So you've identified a prospect using these 5 elements. Hopefully, maybe they have all 5, maybe they have a couple, but you can evaluate how likely this donor is to give to you by looking at their interest. Do they have a personal investment in your mission, their capacity, and their affiliation? So let's break these down a little bit more. And we'll start with interest first. So really, the question for this one is, do they have a personal investment / interest in your mission? Ideally, if they've already donated to you, you can check this box and say yes really quickly. But if they haven't, you can look at their previous charitable giving to see what other causes are they supporting. You can look at and see if they sit on any nonprofit boards or foundation boards or volunteer at any organizations. But you can also look at things like hobbies and social media and anything that might indicate, you know, what they like to do, where their passions lie. Our next one is capacity. So do they have the financial ability to make a major gift to your organization? You know, we want to make sure as we're going through this, we're spending time on the people who have the ability to make a major gift. And you can look at things like previous charitable giving and look at the amounts, not only where they're giving, but also the dollar amounts. That can help you determine capacity. Real estate ownership is another one that can help you determine capacity. And SEC transactions, that's a really good indicator of wealth. If someone holds stocks, that's a good green flag. And you can look at political giving at the amounts too. And there are also things like boat ownership and airplane ownership and like fossil fuels. Like if they invest in that, that can help you determine, but those are the biggest ones. And our last one is affiliation. So in my opinion, this is the tricky one. Do they have a connection with your organization, and can you get a meeting with this prospect? And to me, this is key. This is exactly why you need a researcher, because they can find overlaps in these relationships and find the link between people, and are often patient people who can do the digging and know how to do the digging and know where to look for it. So a lot of like the same people in a community will attend the same, museum events or something like that, or sit on the same board or be involved in the same organization. So this is another area where a researcher can really shine, when they can find the link and then say, oh, hey, our board member knows this person, let's ask for an introduction or something like that. So if you can check yes on interest, capacity, and affiliation, you are good to go. That's a really good green flag again. But one element of the prospect research cycle is wealth screening. And some of you might be familiar with this term. It's a subset that's focused on wealth indicators like real estate ownership, stock holdings, business affiliations. I just wanted to put this in here because just because someone has high wealth does not mean that they're philanthropic. You always want to do a little bit more digging and see, if they've made other donations or they sit on a board or something like that. But wealth screening is something that's beneficial and can save you a lot of time. It is conducted through screening vendors like iWave, Donor Search, Research Point. There are a lot out there that can help you find data really quickly and accurately. But I always advocate for taking a more holistic approach when conducting research. So looking at the philanthropic indicators, involvement, volunteering, that type of thing. And one disclaimer about wealth screening, it is the most expensive part about prospect research. Usually you run your entire database or a subset of it every 3 to 5 years. So that is a way to save money. Wealth screening isn't an everyday thing, but there is a cost to it. But it does save you time. So you kind of just need to weigh the pros and cons and see what's best for your organization. So now we can talk about some resources that you can use to help you conduct research. First, you can use databases like Donor Search, Wealth Engine, Windfall. There are a bunch out there. These usually do have a subscription cost to it annually. But if a database isn't in your budget for this year, you can use GuideStar is a really great resource. Other nonprofit annual reports and 990s, so you can see who's giving to this organization at what amount. You can use newspapers and business journals, again, to keep up with the comings and goings. FEC and SEC data is publicly available, so you can use that. And using tax assessor sites and Zillow is really helpful in determining wealth as well. And thanks, Aurora, for that note. LinkedIn is really awesome to use, especially when, determining business connections and seeing if someone's an executive at an organization. So same goes for, there are a ton of resources you can use out there. Just make sure that, the information you're finding is correct. But yes, totally LinkedIn. So we kind of went over the basics for prospecting for individual donors. One question I get a lot is, what about foundations? Grant funding is really lucrative and, everyone's interested in this, rightly so. And I think that the elements for conducting foundation prospect research and individual prospect research are very similar. You want to look for the same things, just through a different lens. So obviously you want to make sure the foundation is being philanthropic, making their payout every year and giving to organizations that are similar to yours. But you want to make sure you have a clear mission and vision alignment, that they've expressed a mission or an interest in your mission or like an area of that. You also want to make sure they have the financial capacity to give to you. You can look at previous grants given to determine common grant amounts and something like that. And it's important also to have an affiliation with them. I find this one a little bit more flexible in the grant making space, especially if they accept unsolicited proposals or something like that. But you still want the same key elements. And some resources for foundation and grant prospect research to use. Again, databases, Foundation Directory Online is a really great one. Grant Station is another one. There are a lot out there. I always recommend with these, just do your digging, because some of them will only show foundations that are openly accepting applications, while some will show any foundation ever. So just make sure that you're getting what you need when subscribing to a database. But again, GuideStar and Charity Navigator, those are great websites to use. 990s, annual reports, impact reports. But I think for foundations, you can also reach out to previous grant recipients and, learn a little bit more about the process and what the experience was like for them. Again, rely on your networks, and we're all in this together. We're all hoping for a bunch of funding to come in, and we should all be rooting for each other. So that's the basics of prospect research, but now Susanne is going to jump into prospect development a little bit more, and specifically how it looks like at her nonprofit newsroom, Mother Jones. So take it away, Susanne.
Thank you, Emily. And I'm going to ask you to share, if you don't mind,
Totally.
the presentation so I can pull up mine with the notes. Thank you.
Let me just get that going. Present. There. Can you see my screen?
Thank you very much. I gotcha. Yep. So yes, I am Susanne, prospect development person at Mother Jones. I'm going to talk about what it looks like in real life at Mother Jones, what I do. I'm going to focus because we don't have a ton of time and there's a ton to talk about, we could talk about. I'm going to focus on the identification piece. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we manage our prospect research data in our database. And then I'm going to jump into our prospect management system, how we manage prospects in our database through the fundraising lifecycle, because we have a fairly robust system to manage that. So Mother Jones, I am the only researcher. I'm actually the first full-time researcher. There was someone doing research prior to my arrival 3 years ago, but like a lot of shops, she was doing other things as well. So research was peripheral to her other duties, but it's a perfect example when someone's doing a little bit of research, they can show great value. And a lot of times that is absolutely the trajectory that a full-time researcher will be hired based on somebody doing a little bit around the edges. So I work with 5 major gift officers. I also work with our mid-level gift officer. Across the major gift portfolios, we have about 500 prospects assigned. When I started, that number was a lot bigger. One of the first things I wanted to do was to cull the portfolios down a little bit to make sure that the people assigned were actually viable, that they were real prospects. So that number has come down quite a bit since I started. We have about 1,000 mid-level donors in the mid-level portfolio, which is just one level down from major gifts. And there's a segment in that portfolio that I work with too, which is about 200 people. We think they look like major gift prospects, but we're using a custom internal score based on giving behavior and research data that I have contributed to elevate people from that segment, hopefully up to the major gifts level. Additionally, I actually have a portfolio. I call it a portfolio. It's people that I code research lead. There's about 200 names in that pool. They look interesting to me. I see tons of capacity, but I don't see affinity yet. I see that they made a big gift at a like-minded organization, and I want to keep tabs on them. Research can always identify more prospects than gift officers can manage. So you got to have a place to put them. So I am very liberal with coding people research leads. It's anybody that I want to keep track of because my researcher's brain says, I want to know more about them. And I also want to know what their giving might be with Mother Jones, because that will indicate something else to me if they continue to give to us and they're a research lead. We use Salesforce, like I'm sure some of you, highly customizable. We have built a ton of pages and fields and data points to manage our program. And we have iWave. Emily mentioned iWave. I'm a huge fan. We buy 20,000 screens annually, which is about right for us. If we were pre-campaign or something, we would want more than that to do a big, massive screening of our database, but 20,000 annually, I can get by with doing a few project screens here and there, and then doing the constant weekly screens that I'm doing that I'll talk a little bit more about. I think this size, one researcher for 5 gift officers, is a pretty good workable model. I'm very, very involved with the gift officers and their portfolios. So any more than 5, I think it might get a little heavy with the meetings, but this works very well for us. Next slide. Oh, great. Sorry, here it is. So let's talk about identification and kind of what I do. I am always thinking about prospect identification. That is the reason to have a researcher full time. That is my job, is to fill the prospect pipeline with viable, interesting people for our gift officers to engage. I don't provide a list of prospects. My threshold for providing names to our gift officers is pretty high. I provide really much more deeply researched names than other shops might, because I want to smooth the way for the gift officer as much as possible. So I'm actually doing pretty full research on prospects as they come into the pipeline. And on that list of sort of identification areas that I've listed there on the slide, the weekly donor review, I think, and the external networks and donors are probably the most important activity that I undertake with regard to identification. The weekly donor review, we get a list of gifts that have come in every single day, and I look at that every single day. And then once a week, I will actually screen that list through iWave. And it's key to my identification process. I can think of 2 recent examples where $50, $100 gifts have come in, and I ran them through iWave in my batch screening, and voila, we've got somebody who is connected to multi-generational philanthropic wealth, clearly has a little bit of affinity for us. Somebody else gave a $50 gift, and they are huge, tons of linkages, evident affinity for us, and massive, massive capacity. People like that would never, well, I don't never say never, but they probably would not surface if a researcher or someone wasn't really digging into that data every single day or as often as possible. Because $50, $100. We love it when people show up with a $5,000 gift. You're like, oh, they're a prospect. But it's these $50, $100 donors that research can really dig into. And by sending them through a screening and then digging a little further, I can create a pretty good prospect, pretty good looking prospect. The external networks and donors, this is about just staying aware of the landscape. Oh my God, I read everything I can find. I'm on all the newsletter lists. I do foundation research too, which means I'm on every newsletter list for every foundation I think might be a prospect for us. I'm just trying to stay aware of who's giving what to whom in our area. That is incredibly helpful when you're, there's always those times when you're going to look outside your database for prospects. So understanding who the big donors are, even if they're not giving to you yet, is super, super important. So you can start laying the groundwork. Events travel, I will ID prospects for events. We do code prospects in our database for interest areas. Voting rights, for example, if we do an event where voting rights is being discussed, I may try to run that list and say, hey, we should invite this person based on their giving and this person. Same thing with travel. If a gift officer or our CEO or a journalist is going to be somewhere, I got to take that opportunity to try to get people together. So I'm trying to find people in a geo area with a certain interest that has a recent gift to us. So it's that kind of analysis. Annual iWave screen, I think I already mentioned, I will do a bigger iWave screen depending, it's kind of need dependent, but I usually do 1 or 2 of those a year. All right. So, and we can move to the next slide. All of this lovely information, what do we do with it? I'm researching every day, all day. We can just move to the next slide, Emily, thank you. We have built a process prospect research page in Salesforce. I'm going to show you, it's going to take 3 slides because I wanted it to be readable. None of this is private. This is my record in Salesforce, and it's all lies made up. So, but I wanted to show everyone what we actually capture. So the first section is bio information. As Emily was saying, you got to find a link. You got to find something that is a pathway for our gift officers to create that relationship. I'm looking at education. I want to know how old they are. I want to find a birth date because that is super important when you're thinking about maybe a planned gift strategy for somebody. Hobbies, interests. You can see we track LinkedIn. Sometimes that's the only way to get in touch with people. Finding emails is notoriously difficult, but if I have a LinkedIn address, at least I can tell the gift officer, maybe you could ping them on LinkedIn. Same with social networks, right? We're always looking for the Twitter. I'm always reading prospects' Twitter feeds just to try to get a sense of who they are. You can see that we code for philanthropic interest, as I mentioned. I want to understand, I want a data point to understand what they're interested in so we can use that for engagement. Same thing with industry in the business area there. I'm coded for nonprofit. Same reason as philanthropic interest. I want to be able to run a list of people if necessary. And next slide, the middle part of this prospect research page in Salesforce for us is the wealth indicators section. This is where what I use to build capacity ratings. I don't remember if we've talked about capacity ratings yet. A capacity rating is just a rating, a value rating that tells us what we think this person is financially capable of giving to us or to any organization, purely based on what I can find wealth indicator wise. Even though there are numbers there's currency listed. This is an art, not a science. So I do my very best to try to understand someone's capacity. But I have to make guesses, and I can never know debts. I can never know the full picture, but I'm just trying to bucket somebody. I'm just trying to know whether or not we should do $1 million strategy or if it's $10,000 ask. I mean, it's so important to give the gift officer some context when you're identifying prospects. And also, if I am only identifying prospects with a $10,000 capacity, that tells me that I need to find more higher capacity prospects. So I might change how I'm looking at prospecting. You can see the various philanthropic giving that is so important to try to track and find out what people are giving and who they're giving to. It gives you an idea of what they're giving annually. That's very helpful with capacity. Political giving, Emily mentioned, there's some, we're backing away from it a little bit, but it's still super informational. And I think that's it for that slide. The final slide for our prospect research page is just an affiliation field, any linkages that we know of, making sure to track that on this page. And then you can see at the bottom, the Mojo gift capacity rating. That's where I actually give them a dollar rating. And the industry standard is that rating is over 5 years. So we want someone to commit to us a bigger commitment, and it can be paid over 5 years. So anytime you see a capacity rating, it's actually 50 to 100 is 10K paid for 5 years straight. So with a capacity rating, it helps me know that everybody we have assigned at least has major gift capacity. It's really important to understand that there's financial capacity there, first of all, if you're really prospecting for major gifts. Okay. So that's our prospect research page. That's where all the data goes. So let's jump into prospect management. I have a fear I'm going to run out of time. So prospect management, Emily touched on this as well. Prospect management is just a way to use data to track all of your donors and, well, your assigned major gift donors and prospects through their life cycle with you. So you know at any time sort of where they are in the process and are you moving them? if you keep asking for the same amount over and over again, it's good to know that, to have the data to show you where the room for growth is, or where there are incredible hidden opportunities for increased asks or planned gift asks, things like that. I think of it as just, the fundraising train is on the tracks and it's going to go forward because gift officers are amazing and they're doing their jobs. But I want to make sure that we keep moving forward, that we keep, adding stretch goals if we need to. And so prospect management allows you to really prove whatever your theory is about keeping things moving forward. I would say that my time is 50% research and 50% prospect management. And that might be kind of surprising, but there's so much overlap, right? It's all prospects. And I think one without the other, you're missing a piece. You're missing kind of an arm on the torso if you don't have both, or aren't at least thinking about both. Next slide. So at Mother Jones, our prospect management system, it's certainly all in the database. We have created a lot of custom things in Salesforce. We have a Salesforce staff member who's amazing. And so anything I could dream up, he could basically create, which is amazing to me. And research has really decided to drive this process. That doesn't mean that I'm in charge of it. It means that I'm most interested in it and I want to see this data work for us. But it doesn't work if the gift officers are not doing it. It doesn't work. It's not like me reporting on things. It's about the team agreeing to put the data in, to pay attention to the data, and to look at the results together. So everybody, our whole team is very involved and engaged in our prospect management system. The key way I keep this program on my front burner and on the gift officer's front burner is monthly meetings. I meet with every single MGO every month, and we talk about everything about their portfolio. I am able to run reports based on data that we collect that says, hey, these 10 people haven't had any sort of activity from you yet this year. Let's try to do something with them. Let's put them on the front burner. And so just someone, a partner, sort of highlighting for you in your portfolio what would be helpful to do next is really good. These meetings are incredibly fruitful and they do keep the system moving and keep it alive. And next slide. So our key data, this is the data that basically, there's more, but this is really the essence of our prospect management system. We need a capacity rating on everybody. I'll explain in the next slide what status and classification are. You got to have a strategy. We do fiscal year strategies. So every single assigned prospect in a portfolio has a handwritten strategy by the gift officer working with research for the fiscal year. Super, super helpful. And then we count moves and touches. We don't have goals really around moves and touches. And if everyone knows what moves and touches are, it's like a contact report. Gift officers enter, I had a meeting with this person, or I tried to meet this person, or I'm going to ask this person for this gift. So any interaction with the prospect gets entered in Salesforce. So here are the examples of those fields, those data points. You can see the capacity rating lists there. These are literally the drop downs that I screenshot from our database. There is a capacity rating called transfer of wealth that didn't make it on that list because it got cut off, but that's actually a really important one for up and coming young inheritors, resource generation, et cetera, et cetera. The status. So what used to be in this status field was the more typical, Emily showed that slide that has qualification, cultivation, solicitation, steward, like that, the life cycle of a prospect. That's what used to be in our status field. And we were like, is that useful? Do we care if someone is in cultivation for 8 months or a year? We weren't really using it. So we said, what do we want to know in this field? We want to know what we're doing with someone this fiscal year regarding their giving. We know we need to cultivate. We know we need to qualify. So we chose these basically one-word quick data points. Every gift officer during fiscal year planning, they have to choose one of these for every assigned prospect in their portfolio. This is what I'm doing with this person. I'm going to increase their ask this year, or I'm not going to make an ask this year. And then from what you see in the status field, you can look at the narrative strategy and understand more context around why. The classification is, we really only use the priority and standard, the first two choices. That's purely a way to segment our priority people up out of the portfolio. The dashboards that we use, we have the ability to filter the dashboard by classification. So this year we have a pretty hefty priority group. It's people that are just front burner to get these stretch asks. And so we're able to look at that group separately just by that classification. And you can see that's where my research lead pool lives as well. It's a classification. The strategy. This is just a note and it's pinned to the top of every record. So you open a record of an assigned prospect in Salesforce for major gifts and you see the narrative strategy. It is a lot of work to do this every year, but it is good work and it's so, so important. I don't know if the gift officers would love, I don't know if they would agree that this is like one of the most important things we do, but I am so on board with the building the strategy every single year. A couple months before our fiscal year starts, I start going like, we're going to change our portfolio meeting to strategy building. And we just do it name by name by name, but that means we are really talking about every prospect. And research requests come out of these conversations. Gift officer will say, I think I got an increase this year with this person, but I don't know what else they give to. And I can say, great, let me do a research request for myself and I will make sure you have that information so you can build the strategy. That's actually a good example of how this all works together, research and prospect management. I think we can move on. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few examples of our dashboards. This is our time check. It's 10:02. Quickly, a couple examples of our dashboards that I just screenshot. This is how we look at status and classification across the major gift portfolios. So the top one, you can barely see it. We all can easily see how many people we have to qualify this year. It's that darkish blue, 166. It's kind of a lot. It's 34%. It's actually a little high, but I know why that's true. But that, having that data in the system allows us to take a quick look at all portfolios and go, where is the work this year? And if we have 50% decrease asks this fiscal year, that tells you something. Or we have very few planned asks in this chart this year. And that may be something we want to think about. So being able to visualize the data that you're gathering is kind of the goal. The classification at the bottom, very straightforward. It's our priority and standard. That's fine, Emily. This is, I mentioned moves and touches. So this is another section of our major gifts dashboard. It just shows us how many what we call moves and touches are being entered into the database by month. So these are gift officers entering their contact reports, telling us what they did with a prospect, how the meeting went, when the next meeting is. So a move is what we want to see. That is the really substantive interaction that kind of left you with a to-do list, and you talked about Mother Jones a lot, and you even addressed their giving. That's a move. A touch is more like, thank you so much, I saw you on MSNBC, you look great. So nothing too substantive, but it's still an important piece of the cultivation process. So we wanted to capture that. So you can see as our months go by in our fiscal year, those lines just continue on. And I think next is the final slide. So this is, I just exported this from our dashboard. So you could easily do something like this in Excel, because this essentially is Excel. This is how it all comes together. And this is the panel in our dashboard that I use probably most frequently of the major gifts dashboard. You can just see at a glance what we're doing with someone. So you see the prospect name, you know immediately by their status what we're doing this fiscal year. You can see how they're rated by research. What is their capacity rating? You can see what we're going to ask them for. And then if you want more reading, you can look at the fiscal year strategy. And these are actual strategies that the gift officers have worked really, really hard to build for this fiscal year. Of course, I took out all of the identifying information, but it's a really robust system. And yeah, and I think it's helping us move things along, keep the train moving forward, as I said before. Next, and I think last slide before we go to questions. Yes, so I hope that you have, you're coming away with an understanding that, you know, research is more than providing lists of names. And I think you know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's about really being a partner to the major gift team or the major gift officer, if it's just a single gift officer, collaboration on strategies, feeding the gift officer as many really well data qualified or research qualified prospects as possible, understanding the organization's needs so you can prospect in a way that is efficient, very efficient and effective, and making sure that your ask amounts are right, making sure that someone's not languishing where they should be ascending up your gift pipeline. Yeah, and I think that wraps it up for me.
Yeah, that was great.
And we may.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions. I see that there was a couple in the chat. Someone asked, Adam asked, what's your definition of a major donor? I say $5,000 or above, but I'm curious, Suzanne, what it is at Mother Jones.
Yeah, I think officially 5,000. I operate, this may sound weird, but I operate at 10,000. So it's weird, but it could be, it is different in my brain. For research, I want people to be at 10,000 when I rate them. I don't want to, there's too many people that are qualified at 5,000, essentially.
Yeah, and I think it depends on your organization too. You know, what's the major gift for your organization? It could be above 5,000, you know, it could be a little bit less. It's best to customize it to, you know, gifts your organization has seen before. Oh, Suzanne, I think this would be a good question for you. Jamie asks, do you have a formula to determine the number of asks versus the amount of donors? In other words, is there a standard conversion rate for most organizations?
So asks, so let's see. I think what you're asking is well, maybe there's two different conversion rates. When I am prospecting for a certain, say a campaign, I would want to provide 10 prospects for every one that's actually going to become a viable prospect with them in a portfolio where the major gift officer was able to say, yes, I definitely have a plan for this person to make a major gift ask. So like 1 to 10. Asks is different. You did specify asks, but I think that's a little different and that's more organization specific. It depends on so many things. But what I was saying earlier, that I like to provide really high quality prospects. I do a lot of research on people before I present them to the major gifts team. I want to make sure that they're as good as it can get. And so my ratio is lower than that. But I think industry standard, 1 to 3 to 10, something like that. It will vary. We're so different. Little journalism shop, so different than like Georgetown or something, and that data is out there. Analytics, research and analytics is, you can find all that data fairly easily, actually.
Thank you.
What else?
A question about any advice for small shops. This person's a general manager working with a development director. What would you say are the minimum things we should spend time on? That's a good question. And I've worked with a lot of small shops before. And I think the qualification part is really important because your time is so limited. When you look at the beginning, you might see like a mountain, like, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn. But I think in the end, it really does save you time. And, research is an important part of, I think, any fundraising operation, regardless of how small you are. Any amount of time you can devote to it, I say is better than nothing, and if you do have less time, it might be good to invest in some time-saving resources, like wealth screening and that type of thing. I think would be very beneficial. But Susanne, do you have any other advice for small shops?
I love what you said, Emily. Any research is better than no research. And looking at your current donors for any indicator of capacity. You can hire contract researchers. There is a whole field of contract researchers. They can work 5 hours, 10 hours. So it's not like an all or nothing thing. And sometimes they come with wealth screening platforms that they use. So they have all the sources. You don't have to provide them. So you could look into that. There's even 5 hours a week. You could hire a contact researcher, you would see benefit, I do believe. So
yeah, if contractors are a great way, if you have that in your budget and just don't have the time but still need it, there are a lot out there. And I believe we made a list of resources that LendFest will share after this that also link to free research resources and some consulting agency and some guides with how to connect. Oh, yeah, that's how you connect with them. So there's a guide on how to do it yourself, but also some tips on, free resources and consultants that we recommend.
Yeah, and I can, now that I know that question, I'll add that to our tip sheet. A couple contract agencies that I know and that are really good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a good question from Jill. As someone who also follows multiple philanthropy newsletter, foundation blast, news site, etc., how do you prioritize and prevent information overload? What a good question. Reading that question, I just got the visualization of my inbox overflowing with that kind of thing. I don't know about you, Susanne, but I always send those to a separate place, and maybe I'll read them when I eat lunch. I like to set aside intentional time for certain tasks when I'm doing research. But usually researchers are kind of very silent, I'm going to do this now. So I think for me, it's important to just be very intentional about my time and literally block it off on my calendar so people know Emily's in the zone this moment, But I know, Susanne, you said you sign up for all of the newsletters, so I bet you have some really good advice on that.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. It's complete overload, but this is my job, so I'm not trying to juggle everything else. This is a big part of my job that I prioritize. So I just make time to do it because it really has results when I read about a foundation staff member transitioning or a new program. And so I don't know, I just do it. But yeah, it's a lot. It's kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah, just gotta find. Oh, I like this. Adam has a 15-minute per prospect rule. If you can't find qualifying information, 15 minutes, stop. That's a good idea for people with limited capacity. It's I used to do that in one of my roles where it's I had so much to do. I'd be I'm looking for a certain amount of time. I'm spending this much time on a profile, and after that it's I've done all I can do, so that's really good advice. Yeah, well, I believe that's 5 o'clock, well, Eastern time zone, excuse me. So we put our contact information up on that last slide. Feel free to contact us. We're more than happy to answer any questions or provide any help that we can. So just feel free to email us. We're happy to help, but thanks everyone for coming today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.